Welcome to the Infinite Jungle, the podcast about the evolution of Ethereum. I'm your host, Christine Kim, VP of Research at Galaxy, and today on the show, we're going to be talking about how the Dencun upgrade went, Ethereum's 15th execution layer hard fork, and we're also going to be featuring an interview that I did at ETH Denver with the co-founder of the Manta rollup. It's one of the largest rollups on Ethereum by total value locked. I have a really great conversation with Kenny Lee, the co-founder of Manta, and we have a really kind of a really meta discussion about the roadmap for rollups and how rollups should in the future accrue value back to Ethereum. So that's all what we have for you this episode. But before we get started, as usual, here is a quick disclaimer. I need to remind you to please refer to the disclaimer linked in the podcast show notes and note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice, an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Galaxy Digital or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. On Wednesday, March 13th, developers successfully executed the Dencun upgrade. We've been talking about the Dencun upgrade for several shows now, and it is finally live on Ethereum. We finally have blob transactions on Ethereum. And I want to talk about some of the metrics and some of the ways in which we know that the upgrade was very successful. Obviously, there was tons of tweeting and tons of commentary from Ethereum developers, both during the upgrade and on this week's developer call, about how uneventful it was, how boring the upgrade was, as some developers said, because everything went so smoothly. And the reason why we know that is because when developers are evaluating how do you define like a successful upgrade, we're generally looking at a couple of things. So the first thing is validator participation rate. Validators are the entities on Ethereum that are securing the network, that are validating blocks, that are basically keeping the network going and progressing as a blockchain. And so when you have a hard fork, which is a backwards incompatible upgrade happening on the network, you want to make sure that all of your security providers, all of your validators have successfully upgraded their software and are fulfilling their responsibilities on the new version of the chain. Um, and so validator participation rate is a metric that measures what percentage of active validators are successfully fulfilling those responsibilities, producing blocks, validating transactions. And throughout the upgrade, before and after, immediately after the Dencun upgrade went live, the validator participation rate did not see a meaningful drop. It remained extremely high, above 90%, which is an indicator of a very healthy network. So the fact that many validators were clearly ready for this upgrade, they had upgraded their execution layer software, their consensus layer software, their MEV boost software, all of the parts of software that I had discussed on last week's episode, because they had successfully done that, validator participation rate remained high. And there didn't appear to be any bugs or issues in the new software that they were upgrading to that prevented them from connecting to Ethereum. So validator participation rate staying really high throughout the upgrade and immediately after was a really good sign that the upgrade was happening well and smoothly. So you have to consider that once the network reaches the finality checkpoint, after every single two epochs, every 12.8 minutes, as Ethereum reaches that finality checkpoint, all the transactions up until that point, up until finality is reached, all those transactions are considered virtually immutable. To change those transactions, you would basically need to burn or destroy at minimum 1/3 of total ETH staked, because all of the transactions up until the finality checkpoint are backed by the attestations and the votes, basically, of validators that have staked their ETH, that are attesting, saying this is the correct view of the chain, and these are the canonical transactions and canonical blocks. on Ethereum. But before the finality checkpoint, you have, you have validators that are constantly proposing new blocks and proposing new transactions. And some of those transactions have a likelihood of being reorged, which means basically just swapped out for another block. But all of the transactions in the blocks that up until the finality checkpoint you can consider are virtually finalized. They are not able to be changed, because if they were changed, then that would mean a significant loss in monetary value of the stake of validators. So that's a little bit of an explanation of what we mean by network finality. And how this relates to network health is, if finality was delayed, if we were expecting finality to be reached after a certain point, and finality is basically reached when we have at least 2/3 of validators, at the very least, the majority of validators saying, yes, this is the correct view of the chain. If we didn't have that many validators, enough validators to attest to the correctness of the chain, then finality would be delayed. Then you wouldn't see these epochs being justified and being finalized. Justified is another kind of technical term before an epoch reaches finalization, because epochs reach finalization every 2 epochs, and right before that, after at least 2/3 of validators attest to one epoch, that epoch becomes justified, and then if the epoch after that also becomes attested to by validators, by at least 2/3 validators, then you get finalization. So it's kind of like this stepped way of making sure that the chain continues to progress, and all validators are continuing to come to consensus. And so after the Denkun upgrade, we did not see any delays to finality. We saw blocks continue to be proposed by validators. At least 2/3 of validators were correctly attesting to the validity of the chain, and we saw finality reached on Ethereum 2 epochs after the upgrade went live. So that was a really healthy indicator that the network was working as anticipated. There did not seem to be any major issues, again, with validator client software, or the validators continuing to progress the chain, and continuing to put in their votes, that is their attestations on chain. And the last thing, the last kind of metric that I want to also talk about, of why we think, why Denkun clearly went off without a hitch, and why developers were really able to celebrate how successful the upgrade was, is also because of the anticipated impact of the upgrade. As we know, the biggest change in Denkun was EIP 4844. And the impact of EIP 4844 was expected to be a reduction in fees for layer 2 rollups. And so while most layer 2 rollups were waiting for a couple of hours just to make sure that the network was stable and healthy, according to those indicators that I had mentioned just now, after the rollups realized that, look, the network is stable and there does not appear to be any major issues with the upgrade, let's start to utilize these code changes that were just activated, EIP 4844 mainly. And we did see a major reduction in fees for the rollups that started to use blob transactions, started to use EIP 4844. And so I just want to highlight a few metrics that I'm seeing on these Dune data dashboards. These are public dashboards that Dune wizards, as we call them, these SQL coders on Dune that are putting together all the metrics, the early kind of data that we're getting out of Denkun together. And so I just want to shout out some of these dashboards. I have them now on my computer, but I'm going to explain them to you now. The rollups that we saw initially really start to utilize blobs, from the get-go, or at least like a couple hours after the upgrade went live, was the base rollup. We had Optimism, Zora, ZK Sync, and Starknet. They were kind of the main users of blobs shortly after the upgrade. And Flashbot's team put out a really cool Dune dashboard showing the number of blobs, number of blocks containing blob transactions. And so definitely I'll link all of these dashboards in our show notes so you can take a look at them. But according to Flashbot's dashboards, we've already had over 16,000 blob transactions be submitted to the network. And the rollups that have been using blobs are already starting to see a major reduction in fees. The reduction in fees that I'm listing out here for the base rollup before 30 days before the Dencun upgrade, fees were around 40 cents for every transaction on base, and post Dencun, we're seeing the transactions around 2 cents. For Optimism, also around 30 cents before the upgrade. After the upgrade, now transactions are 1 cent. So we're seeing major reductions in fees, as you can tell. And this data around the fees before and after Dencun is from the 21 shares dashboard at 21 Co on Dune. And finally, one last dashboard that I want to shout out from Hildobby, which shows basically the number of blobs every single rollup is posting. Hildobby has a really good dashboard on Dune. Called Ethereum Blobs, and from his analysis of the blobs that are being posted, it's kind of really cool to see that in basically in the early hours after the upgrade, the majority of blobs were actually posted by Starknet. The Starknet rollup was really going wild with all of the blobs that they were posting, and it looks as though more and more rollups are starting to integrate blobs into their operations, and we're starting to see more rollups like Arbitrum also start to post blobs onto Ethereum. So those are a little bit of the statistics from Dune that indicate that the upgrade, in terms of its anticipated impacts, was indeed a success. That the fees really did go down, and rollups really are using blobs and utilizing the additional block space that are provided by blobs. And we're already starting to see an increasing number of rollups start to utilize the upgrade as well. So in terms of network health, in terms of what we wanted to see out of the upgrade, which is L2s really use the upgrade, use EIP 4844, and the impact that EIP 4844 was supposed to have, which is a reduction in fees, all of that appears to be happening. And it's only been, we're recording this on Friday, so 2 days after the upgrade went live. And so the immediate short-term impacts do seem extremely positive. But as three kind of quick notes about what we should continue to be watching out for in the medium to long term, now that the upgrade is live, the first is definitely, there's a lot more data being passed around on the Ethereum network now. Each blob can hold up to a maximum of 128 kilobytes of data. So it introduces some latency to Ethereum, and it'll be interesting to watch how the additional latency not only impacts network health, but also builder dynamics. Builders are the third-party entities that are packaging blocks with transactions, regular transactions, in addition to blobs. And builders are always in kind of a race to pack as much as they can into a block to get as much value out of the block as possible. But with increased latency from blobs, that might change the competitive dynamics of builders. So that's definitely the increased latency, and how that might impact both network health and builder dynamics is definitely one kind of trend to keep watching out for. Well, the second one that I should mention is whether or not we see secondary markets for blob transactions start to be created over time, because while each blob can contain up to 128 kilobytes of data, not all rollups will need all of that space, right? They might want to, submit a blob transaction and subsidize the cost of it by sharing some of that space with other rollups. And to do that, you would need a secondary market. So that's another kind of interesting dynamic that people had pointed out before the upgrade that is likely to occur. And finally, of course, one of the other continued trends that we want to keep watching for is L2 adoption. Now that fees on rollups are significantly cheaper than they were before the Dencun upgrade, do we start to see more end users from Ethereum start to migrate over to rollups, and how does this impact layer 2 activity? So this is definitely not the end of the data journey. People are going to continue to monitor how the Dencun upgrade impacts Ethereum, and to that, the Ethereum Foundation has created a data challenge, basically a bounty for people to submit their analysis of how the Dencun upgrade has impacted Ethereum with interesting insights. This is the EIP 4844 data challenge. You have to have your submissions in basically in 3 months' time. I think June 14th is the cutoff day. We'll also link in the show notes the data challenge link so you can see. But um, prizes are up to $30,000. So if you are interested in this data and you are already kind of analyzing the impacts, highly encourage people to participate in that data challenge. I'm very excited to see the submissions that come through for the data challenge. Because it will really, these submissions will definitely highlight and surface different takeaways for how the Dencun upgrade has been impacting Ethereum, not just immediately after, but definitely in over the next few months. So in short, the Dencun upgrade was a success by all these metrics, but there's still quite a lot to keep watching for and keep evaluating about the Dencun upgrade in the weeks and in the months to come. There is a data challenge being sponsored by the Ethereum Foundation to source a lot of these insights and to financially incentivize people to really keep an eye out for how this impacts the ecosystem. And of course, developers are just continuing to blaze forward. In the latest dev call, there's a meme where like there's this developer on a computer, and as soon as they achieve one milestone, they have like a little woohoo for like one blip, and then they go back to work. That's definitely Ethereum developers for you, because on the call they spent maybe just 2 minutes talking about how well the upgrade went, and then they went straight to the next upgrade, Pectra, and went straight to focusing on the next big milestone that they're working towards, which is the Pectra upgrade. So it seems like a never-ending amount of work and upgrades, but I think we can all be happy that at the very least, Dencun went well. And look out for more insights and more data about the upgrades still to come. So that's Dencun for you. On the topic of rollups and on the topic of the impact of rollups, on the topic, this is a very relevant topic for what we're going to go into in the next part of the show, which is my interview with Kenny Lee, the co-founder of Manta Network, which is one of the largest rollups by Total Value Locked. We have a really, really interesting discussion on the role that rollups will take, the role that rollups should have in the future roadmap of Ethereum, and we get into some pretty spicy debates on really the value accrual from rollups back to Ethereum. So here's that interview. Welcome back to the Infinite Jungle. I am here with Kenny Lee, the co-founder of Manta Network.
Hello.
Thank you for being on the show, Kenny.
Thanks for having me.
We're here to talk about Manta, which is the third largest rollup by Total Value Locked. I looked this up on L2Beat, and I want to know more about what differentiates Manta from other rollups, the leading ones being Arbitrum and Optimism.
Sure.
And I also, of course, want to get your thoughts on the changing landscape of L2s, how we think the modular blockchain thesis and the ecosystem is going to be going out, or going to be evolving over the next several months and years. But let's start first with Manta and how it works, because it's a rollup that I think not many people talk about in comparison to like Arbitrum and Optimism, but you guys are the third largest by Total Value Locked. And I did a little bit of research on you guys before this show in preparation for in preparation for you being here. And one of the things that kind of stood out to me the most is directly on the website, you say the website says that Manta, the rollup, is powered by Celestia, Polygon, OP Stack, and Polkadot. These are
this feels like a very mixed bag of a bunch of different networks and blockchains. Can you explain how Manta is both an optimistic and a ZK rollup? Also, how it does. It's an Ethereum-based rollup, but also using DA for data availability for Celestia. Like, tell me, what the heck is Manta?
Yeah, what the heck is Manta? So like you mentioned, right, like we are one of the largest L2s in this space, but at the core of it, Manta Network is not a chain. Manta Network is an ecosystem. And currently, this ecosystem consists of two chains. So we have Manta Atlantic, which is our L1 that's built using Substrate, so it's in the Polkadot ecosystem.
That's where the Polkadot comes
Yes,
in.
and then we have Manta Pacific, which is our L2 that's currently using OP Stack, and we are in the process of transitioning over to ZK EVM using Polygon CDK.
Okay.
And on top of that, we are the first L2 to actually leverage Celestia for modular DA. And so the Celestia modular DA is live today with OP Stack on Manta Pacific. And what's been really amazing about that is that over the course of just the past 30 days, we've been able to save our users around like $1.8 million in gas fees, which translates to roughly $20 million a year, right? And the activity hasn't even started picking up yet because we're just starting to see this momentum move into the market. So
And has there been some trade-offs choosing to use Celestia as a DA as opposed to Ethereum DA? I mean, there's so much conversation around the users and the ecosystem that's built on Ethereum. Is there any kind of benefit to using Ethereum as a DA as opposed to Celestia? Like, tell me a little bit more about that decision, because I think it's a big one that I think other rollups are actually going to start to adopt as well. There's clearly,
Sure.
like you said, in dollar terms, like savings for users by using a cheaper DA. But does that make you not an Ethereum rollup?
I mean,
Are you still part of the Ethereum ecosystem, however that might be defined as?
sure, yeah. So the transactions they settle to Ethereum, right? And they're actually guaranteed through Ethereum security.
Explain that a little bit.
Sure. So when you and this is how like the whole sort of modular DA works. So when you make a transaction, right? Say for example, I send you 0.01 ETH. And that transaction information has to be stored somewhere, right? There has to be a record of it. And so, when I interact with a smart contract, I deposit 0.01 ETH into the smart contract. The smart contract needs to store the fact that I deposited that somewhere as well, right? And this is stored in what's essentially called sort of the call data. And so the call data is part of, the entire chunk of information that's put onto Ethereum, at least when you fully settle to Ethereum and you use Ethereum for data availability. Now, the issue here is that Ethereum wasn't built to be a storage center, right? It wasn't built to be Dropbox or Google Drive or something, right? It was built to be a global compute. And so as a result, yes, you can store this information on Ethereum, but it's going to cost a lot. It's very expensive, this call data chunk. It's about 80 to 90% of the entire cost. And so all we've essentially done is said, okay, instead of taking this call data and storing it on Ethereum and making users pay for Ethereum fees, we're going to store it on Celestia, which is a much less expensive alternative because it is specializing in storing call data. And you see a lot of sort of DA players coming into this space as well, such as like EigenLayer, such as Avail, right, that also offer these sort of, yeah, exactly. So they're all offering these sort of alternative DA solutions that are coming at a fraction of the cost for the users as compared to, what exists today. So,
But when you say you settle to Ethereum, I completely understand that you are storing records of what's happening on the Manta rollup on Celestia. When you say you settle to Ethereum, does that mean that the ordering of transactions happens on Ethereum? I was under the assumption that if you're putting data on Celestia, ultimately finality of the transactions that are happening on Manta is dictated by the Celestia network, which is not as decentralized, maybe not as lindy, as proven as and say like known to be resilient over time, because it's a new data availability network, Celestia is, as Ethereum, which has been around since 2000, for years, 2015, I think.
Sure, yeah,
Or
around there.
Around there. I should know this. So what does the settling process look like on Ethereum? Why is that an important? Why did you choose to do data availability for Celestia, but then settle on Ethereum? Like what's the trade-offs there?
For the exact reason that you just mentioned, right? The security side. And so, you can think of Celestia purely as that sort of storage layer. And so there is no finality on Celestia. There's only proof that these types of transactions, these actions all happen. And Celestia can provide that proof to Ethereum if needed, because all the finality is settled on Ethereum.
Oh, so the data is posted to Celestia, and then there's a proof that you can generate from Celestia that you then post to Ethereum.
Yeah, it's like a pointer, like we're still taking the information, all the batch transactions, and throwing it onto to Ethereum. But then in these sort of Ethereum transactions, there's a pointer that says, okay, check this blob in Celestia, and Celestia does some data availability sampling to verify that these transactions, happen the way they are, and the roll-up transaction is verified.
But is the security of having that pointer as opposed to the actual data on Ethereum a difference? So instead of having the data availability of Ethereum, having the transactions themselves be replicated by all the Ethereum nodes, you now just have a pointer that's replicated by all the Ethereum nodes that says, look at the Celestia blockchain. And if the Celestia blockchain, let's just say it's down, or maybe some of the data gets reorganized, or some things happen on Celestia as a newer blockchain, maybe there's some additional risk. Is that less security?
Sure, that's a really good question. I think there's two sort of security components here, right? One is the trust assumption of the L2 itself, and the other one is sort of that validator set that you're talking about. So the trust assumption of the L2 itself is, first and foremost is the L2 being a good actor? Is the sequencer on the L2 being a good actor, right? Is it even posting the right information? In which case, that has nothing to do with either Ethereum nor Celestia. But on the other hand, right, when you're thinking about the validators and everything, right? Like with Celestia, yeah, if it goes down, right, there's actually Ethereum fallback. And so the data continues to post, but it actually leverages Ethereum at the moment. And so there's no downtime for the users, but where the data is actually posted is going to switch from Celestia over to Ethereum. That's more of like a fallback sort of mechanism. But in terms of the security, I think you are right? Like in terms of Celestia versus Ethereum, right? Ethereum is sort of battle tested in that sense. And I think that in the future, right, the best case scenario here, especially after Ethereum proto-dank sharding and then furthermore full dank sharding, is that I think, because we're looking at this, and a lot of projects are looking at this, having multiple data availability layers. And so you don't only have that resiliency in terms of fallback, but you also have that redundancy in the event that one of the DA solutions has any issues, including blob storage on Ethereum after proto-dank sharding.
Yeah, interesting. I worry about Ethereum's fee revenue from the majority of user activity moving to L2s, because with upgrades like proto-dank sharding, Dencun, which we talked about on this show quite a bit, full dank sharding, Ethereum becoming more optimized as a DA layer, pushing users and that fee revenue to layer 2s, and layer 2s not actually bringing back a ton of revenue to Ethereum because there's so many options for data availability. I wonder if you also view Ethereum ceding its advantage at being general compute, at being the best decentralized general purpose blockchain, to now pivoting to trying to be a data availability layer. Like, in my mind, I don't know if it's a wise decision from the perspective of protocol revenue, of making sure that Ethereum stays at the top of its game, kind of like always the number one, I guess, like the number one general purpose blockchain. I mean, obviously with a pivot to DA, sounds like it's just going to become a lot more competitive for Ethereum, because you're right, it was never built in the beginning to be a DA layer. And even if it does succeed in becoming a great DA layer, it doesn't sound like rollups are really, it doesn't sound like that for rollups, having one DA layer is really even the best strategy, because clearly there's a lot of benefit in trying to make data redundant if you can. I'm sure that's additional cost, but yeah, this isn't a question like primarily on Manta, but like this, what do you think about the pivot that Ethereum is doing right now to DA?
Yeah, it's a really good question, right? The pivot to DA. There's a couple of things to think about here. One is, what's the alternative, right? Like, is it possible that Ethereum can sustain 1 billion users with 100 killer apps? Right, like at least at this stage, not really, right? The scalability solutions today are all focused on layer 2 scalability, app chains, layer 3s, aggregation, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's inevitable that this is sort of the trend that the industry's headed it towards. And so the question now becomes, should Ethereum work in the best interest of Ethereum, or should Ethereum work in the best interest of the users and the community? And I think if the answer is the latter, then it does have to adapt in order to provide that level of scalability to have Web3 break through into that next generation. So I think that's the first part. And then the second part is just a bigger sort of macro perspective on where the industry's headed. I think that revenue and fees are very high right now because the industry on the infrastructure layer hasn't fully commoditized. I think that once commoditization is realized, then it will be a price war. Because at the end of the day, right, like if you think about it, history of crypto has proven, right, like you've got 2011, 2013, you see this explosion of Bitcoin forks that are supposed to outcompete Bitcoin. You've got Litecoin, you've got Digibyte, you've got, I don't know, Ravencoin, and then later like Bitcoin Cash and all this other stuff that are saying, I'm gonna do better than Bitcoin because I'm going to fork this core technology and add this innovation into it, whether it's reducing block speed generation time or increasing block size or whatever it may be. And at the time, right, all these differentiators in that small pond felt like such a huge technology difference that's going to capture the market. But then when you zoom out to 2024, no one really cares, right? Bitcoin is still the dominant player, and all these other technologies sort of have fallen by the wayside. And then you see the same thing playing out in Ethereum. In 2016, 2017, all the emergence of Ethereum killers, right? The EOSs of the world, the NEOs of the world, et cetera, et cetera. And these are projects that are saying, okay, Ethereum is okay, but we're gonna make it faster. We're gonna give various programming languages so developers have options. We're gonna do all this and all that. And during that time, it felt like such a world of difference. This is the differentiator for Qtum. This is the differentiator for NEO. This is the differentiator for EOS, although, but anyway, so at the time, it felt like the technology that everyone was building out was going to be that game changer. But we fast forward to 2024, and it's still Ethereum, right? Now, we're in a world in 2024 where I think the L2s are going through the same exact thing. We're looking at it and we're saying, oh, our proof generation is going to be way faster than everyone else's. This is going to be way better, right? We're going to use this and all this other stuff. And that's our differentiation. But if that differentiation was really true, then why are developers just deploying on every single chain they see? Obviously, it doesn't matter enough for the developers to say, oh, I only want to deploy on this chain because this technology differentiation is truly much better and far superior than any other chain, so I won't even consider other chains.
Let me push back on a little
Okay,
bit
sure.
of this. Because that, exactly what you're describing is one of the reasons why I lack confidence in L2s.
Yeah.
Right, because we have Bitcoin, and the core part of Bitcoin, despite all these Bitcoin killers, Bitcoin retained the highest amount of decentralization, highest amount of security, things that are very difficult to replicate through a public blockchain. Ethereum, technically you could say Ethereum is also kind of a fork of Bitcoin that like well, inspired by Bitcoin and then
Sure,
it
yeah, yeah,
added
yeah.
the layer
The
of
Turing
general
completeness.
purpose.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
EVM. So Ethereum was the first,
Yeah.
and it started to get network effects that is very difficult to replicate. Network effects, highest amount of decentralization, security, again, like and so despite all these Ethereum killers, you didn't really see that dominant seeding. Now we're in a phase where, for the first time ever, Ethereum is saying these L2s, like we actually want our dominance for people to go. And unfortunately, all these L2s, they're not as secure, they're not as decentralized, they don't have the network effects. There is a very poor user experience in terms of like the interoperability and composability, which makes me wonder, is this a safe bet for Ethereum to make? It doesn't seem like any of these L2s are going to matter. There is no dominant L2 really. What is that one L2 that all the other L2 killers can't really compete against?
Exactly. Yeah. I don't think you're pushing back at all. I think we're on the same page.
But you're working on a Manta, on a roll-up, on an L2. Don't you have to be a little bit more like Manta's the one? I mean, I don't know.
I mean, like, Manta's the one. But I think the bigger picture here is like, what are all these L2s building for, right? Like, at the end of the day, you're absolutely right? These sort of decentralization, developer ecosystems, and all this stuff.
Yeah.
It's not a moat, right? Because everyone's building using Solidity, and everyone can deploy everywhere, and that's exactly what everyone's doing. And so, what is the purpose of an L2, right? Like, what is the differentiating factor of L2s? I think right now, because we're starting and we have all this differentiation and innovation in this space today, there's slight, differentiation that you can market. But when you really zoom out 5-10 years from now, it's going to be commodity. What does that commodity look like? That commodity is going to look like all the years of efforts that all the L2 innovation has been driving towards in these next few years, including what Manta Network is building, right? And so collectively, I see a world where L2 scalability cannot be vertical. It cannot be just like, oh, Arbitrum dominates, everyone else doesn't dominate, and Arbitrum has 100 killer apps, each with 10 million daily active users. No way. Arbitrum's going to implode. Arbitrum can't even handle inscriptions right now. Many L2s can't handle inscriptions right now. So how are you going to handle a Facebook on Arbitrum alone, right? And so, this is no stab at Arbitrum, right? I mean, these I think are scalability issues across all L2s. But the point being that a singular L2 is not the solution for scalability. It has to be a collection of L2s. But whether that collection of L2s is going to be in the form of, oh, I'm going to use Manta and Scroll and ZK Sync and Arbitrum and all this other stuff, or it's going to be oh, I just need 10 L2s right now. And it just deploys in the back end, and the application layer sits on top, and it gets load balanced, just like in cloud computing. The servers here that scale out become the L2s. And so as you need more TPS, as you need to address user load, you can continue to spin out ephemeral L2s just to be able to take that on, and that still can settle to Ethereum or whatever the solution may be in the future. And so I think like the differentiator here that is really the key is not about just, building some technology that no other developer feels like would be possible everywhere else, but more so build it in a future-proof way such that once you get to that point of this commoditization, everyone can use your technology in order to scale out. When does that happen? Maybe 5 years from now, maybe 10 years from now, I don't know when, but the point is, this all goes back to modularity. So, what does that mean, right? Like, what does modular even mean? From someone who's just purely in the blockchain space, today it means Celestia, right? It means EigenLayer, it means restaking and all this other stuff. But when you really jump out of the Web3 space into the whole sort of technology space, modularity is all over the place. When you deploy servers on Amazon, right, cloud servers, you don't build your own operating system. You don't build your own database. You don't build your own analytics tools, right? You use Google Analytics. You use Vercel. You use MySQL databases. You use a Linux operating system. Why? Because they've been Linux, or I guess Ubuntu specializes in building the operating system that you can then just plug and play, right? And then the MySQL database, you can just plug and play. And you can migrate from MySQL to something else. I mean, there's vendor lock-in issues and all that stuff, so it's not like a seamless migration. But I think the same sort of play is happening with L2s and even infrastructure in general, right? Like the application layer in the future doesn't have to necessarily think about, oh, I want to deploy only on, Manta or only on Arbitrum, right? No one says, oh, I'm only going to use Duolingo if it's deployed on AWS, right? So like the L2s, I think, will become a commodity, and I think right now it's just more so a collective responsibility of the space to, one, innovate in terms of building the best technology, and two, find the most scalable and future-proof approaches of building. And I think future-proofness comes in that form of modularity. We were able to, when we launched Manta, on day one, it was full settlement to Ethereum, full finality on Ethereum, OP stack, right? And so what that meant was there's no modular DA. But then when Celestia came out, right, we're the first L2 to actually migrate over and use Celestia for modular DA. That was a seamless transition. There was no hard fork. There was no downtime in block generation. There was no downtime for the users. The only noticeable transition was the user saw, oh, my fees are a fraction of the cost that it was before, right? Like, I think that's very powerful because we've finally gotten to a point in Web3 now where you have specialized services that can do things much faster and much better than you can in-house, and you're able to plug those in to continue to deliver value to the users in something that's changing so rapidly, right? Like, when you were in the Bitcoin space in 2011, 2013, 2015 even, like, who would have known that Ethereum would have come to dominate the entire sort of global computing space, right? But now look at where we are today, and but none of those Bitcoin forks could pivot into this. It was all built in-house, and there's nothing really that could change on a dime, right? But the industry changed. And then on Ethereum side, when Ethereum came out, who knew that scalability was going to be such a big issue? I mean, like, I remember when Ethereum first came out, like the way I was pitched was like, oh yeah, Uber, decentralized Uber. On an L1, which was like, oh my God, that's entirely possible. And now we're just like, can't even mint inscriptions, right? Like L2s can't even handle that. So like, but now, like, as the scalability issues become more and more apparent, right, these L1s are not able to pivot and adapt. And so the L2s, right, like as additional scalability issues emerge, how do L2s pivot? How do L2s adapt? And I think like that's not a problem of just technology, but that's a problem of that like monolithic versus modular mindset.
Okay, this is fascinating. I mean, hindsight is always 2020, and crypto as an industry, we're still very much in the early days. There are many reasons to pivot, and modularity, I think, is one of the biggest innovations that have happened since Ethereum innovated on Bitcoin with general purpose compute. But one question around that idea that Manta, that the ability to just kind of be able to modularize, to be able to, it's not just finalizing and settling on Ethereum, but now you have Celestia and being able to modularize the stack and offer to users, cheaper fees, a better user experience. All of that, in my mind, is of course easy when you have it all being coordinated by a centralized entity or group of developers. And one of the things that I'm concerned in this vision and in this future that we're going to is, are we losing the open source, like basically the reason why any of this started? Because one of the most difficult things about building blockchains and building general purpose compute and having these applications is the permissionless aspect of it. And one of the things I find a disconnect with is these are very exciting technologies and very exciting ways to improve upon the user experience of Ethereum, but it seems as though to get all of these gains, all of these like new features, you basically have to sacrifice decentralization and permissionlessness. And when you sacrifice that, yes, you're able to get a more Web 2-like experience, of course, and yes, you are able to obfuscate a lot of the back end of what's really going on, but to what end? And so I know that there's a lot of talk about, decentralizing sequencers, having working fraud proofs, and Arbitrum and Optimism and EigenLayer. A lot of the energy and the effort that they put, at least to the public, is figuring out how do we have a sustainable DAO, a sustainable governance, and that's just a much. I don't. It's a very hard problem to solve, and I don't know if this level of complexity can really ever match and be able to support the level of decentralization that very simple blockchains, public blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum achieve right now. Like, what do you think about that?
The trilemma. This is not Illuminati. But no, I think it is the trilemma, right? Like, I mean, you're currently referring to, the sacrifice between decentralization and scalability. And I think that the trilemma cannot be solved by a singular blockchain. It needs to be solved as an entire ecosystem. There are different responsibilities, different roles that different parts of the infrastructure stack can take. I do think that Ethereum's goal should be security and decentralization. I think that on the L2 side, right, like the goal of the L2 is scalability. The goal of the L2 is to bring the technology closer to the users. In order to bring the technology closer to the users, you have to give them something that they're comfortable with. You have to give them something that they are familiar with.
But what is the technology that you're bringing to the user if it's not crypto? Like, if it's not crypto in the sense of...
But it is crypto. Why isn't it? Why isn't it?
Because it's a type of crypto that, like, wouldn't be any different, would be constrained to the same, like, regulatory, legal, the same, what do you call it? Like, basically the same structures, and the product that you're giving isn't any different from what you would potentially get if you were interacting with, like, a Facebook or a Google or an Amazon. Like, what is it that L2s are giving if it's not a platform and a blockchain where you can run unstoppable code?
They're giving optionality. And I'll push back on you and say that what you're saying is taken from a very privileged perspective. It's taken from a perspective that you and I are comfortable with, because we deal with wallet addresses and self-custody and all this stuff every single day. And despite that fact, it's still extremely intimidating, right? Like, I don't know in the past decade of sending blockchain transactions that I've ever just been like, oh yeah, no problem. Like, wallet address, right? Like, I still double check, triple check, and I know that there's, like, some attacks now where, like, they try to mimic your wallet address. So instead of looking at the last 4 alphanumeric symbols, I look at the last 8 alphanumeric symbols, right? Like, it's scary. And so, like, you and I, we're conditioned now to be okay with that. But can we really guarantee that for the 7, maybe 8 billion people now? I don't know how many people there are on Earth right now, like maybe 8 now. But can you really guarantee that for the 8 billion people? Can you really guarantee that they'll be comfortable with that level of responsibility, with that level of self-custody, with that level of nowhere to turn when all their funds are drained, right? Like, is that the user experience that you believe is a sustainable future for the future of finance? That I don't think is entirely true. I would hope so, but I also know that we too are not just crypto folks, but we're also educated folks, right? And so, like, and we have a risk tolerance appetite that someone else that could be equally educated as us doesn't have. And so I think L2s and L3s and app chains and everything else provide that optionality for an ecosystem, a world where people that want to benefit from decentralized security, but don't want to necessarily have to go through the pain of all this stuff that comes with it, have some sort of solution for. And for applications that truly want to benefit on a purely decentralized magnitude, then you can still build applications on the L1. No one's stopping you from that, right? Like, Ethereum's not saying we're not Turing complete anymore, right? So, it's the optionality, I think, that's very powerful.
I will agree, there are gradients.
Yeah.
Decentralization is not a black and white. There is a spectrum, and there are trade-offs and benefits to being a little bit more decentralized versus less. But yeah. I mean, talk more about this, but we
Sure.
are definitely at time.
It was fun.
But I thank you so much, Kenny,
Thank you as
for
well.
chatting with me about this and really helping me to see kind of another perspective on this conversation. I think modularity is, again, just a huge topic, and Ethereum really is, doubling down on data availability as the way to scale. And so I think what we're talking about is just going to be relevant for quite a while. So thank you.
Or they're going to be like, wow, these people said it first.
I don't know. I mean, we're going to have to come back to talk a little bit more about, as we see roll-up competition play out too in the next
Yes.
year, couple years. It's really going to be an exciting kind of thing to watch.
Yeah, that's a whole conversation. I've talked with
Yeah.
talked with a lot of other roll-up founders, and like behind the scenes, yeah, it's a very interesting space. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you again for coming on the Infinite Jungle Pod.
Thanks for having me.
This is Kenny Lee from the
Try
Manta
Lamau.
Network. And we'll see you guys again for another episode of Infinite Jungle another week.
Thank you guys so much for listening to another episode of Infinite Jungle. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and click all the buttons, and engage with the show. I always love to see people's feedback about this show and about the episodes that come out. Excited to talk with you guys again next week. See ya.